Painters, to take them alone, dead and buried, speak to the next generation or to several generations through their work. Is that all, or is there more to come? Perhaps death is not the hardest thing in a painter's life. On a summer day in July 1890, a thin, gaunt man with a scruffy beard and reddish hair slipped into the wheat fields of the French countryside and shot himself in the chest. The story of his pain and anguish, of his struggle to achieve artistic success and recognition, and of his desire to make sense of a hostile world is often portrayed in a legendary manner in literature, film, and song. He signed his art simply Vincent, and the story of what led this man to this tragic point can be traced in the wealth of 750 paintings and 1,600 sketches he produced in a short career that spanned only a decade. In addition, he left an incredible running commentary of his life and art through over 700 letters written to family and friends. Vincent Willem van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853 in Groot-Zundert, the Netherlands. He was the eldest of 6 children born to Theodorus van Gogh, the local minister, and his wife Anna. As a child, Vincent idolized his father, a Protestant minister, and was himself deeply devout and spiritual. But he also displayed a moody restlessness of a loner and enjoyed wandering the countryside of Holland rather than playing with his siblings. In 1869, at the age of 16, Vincent left school and moved to The Hague, a major Dutch city, to become an apprentice to international art dealers where his uncle was a partner. In 1873, he was sent to the London branch and fell unsuccessfully in love with the daughter of his landlady. This was the first of several attempts to find happiness with a woman, and his unrequited passion affected him so badly that he was dismissed from his job in 1875. Vincent was disillusioned with art dealing and with his life. Vincent spent the next few years being thwarted by every endeavor. By the age of 27, he had moved from art salesman to schoolmaster in England, to theological student at Amsterdam University, to lay minister among the impoverished miners of the Grem Borinage district in Belgium. During the winter of 1879-1880, Vincent was so impassioned by what he saw that he gave away all of his clothes and food to the poor. His superiors were so appalled by his fanatical behavior and literal interpretation of Christ's teachings that they fired him. But he remained in Borinage, suffering severe poverty and a spiritual crisis. Finally, in 1880, a penniless and distraught Vincent began to cultivate his own artistic talent. He embraced a new mission to become an artist. He felt that through art, he could bring consolation to humanity. From 1881 to 1885, he lived in the Netherlands and practiced the technical aspects of being an artist. Though largely self-taught, he vigorously sketched miners and peasants. With no means of support at this time, Vincent accepted financial support from his devoted younger brother Theo. Though Theo had little to actually share, he was willing to make the sacrifice. In July 1880, Vincent wrote a thank you letter to Theo for sending him 50 francs to cover his expenses. In the letter he writes, "I must continue to follow the path I take now. If I do nothing, if I study nothing, if I cease searching, then, woe is me, I am lost." In April 1881, Vincent was compelled to move in with his parents, who were now living in Etten, the Netherlands. Theo continued to supply him with paper, and Vincent continued to explore drawing. By Christmas time, after a bitter argument with his father, the volatile Vincent returned to The Hague. He studied for a brief few weeks with Dutch landscape artist Anton Mauve, cousin by marriage, and continued to hone his skills through drawings and watercolors. Though his works were still amateurish, his genius was beginning to emerge. He was eagerly cultivating his favorite subject matters, the rural landscape and the simplistic details of peasant life. He wrote to Theo, "Though I'm often in the depths of misery, there's still calmness, pure harmony and music inside me. I see paintings or drawings in the poorest cottages, in the dirtiest corners, and my mind is driven towards these things with an irresistible momentum. In the summer of 1882, he experimented with oil paint. The paintings from this date reveal the influence of the Dutch school of realism, but without the controlled technique. In late 1883, he once again was forced to return to his parents' home, now living in Newnan. He continued to be an observer of earth, human hardship, and his surroundings. His concentration revealed an intimate connection to the laboring of the peasants through distorted lines and emotional brushstrokes. Most notably, the contrast of shadow and light is evident in the series of portraits from this time. Vincent grew dissatisfied with Theo's attempts to sell his works, so the brothers struck an agreement. Theo would send a regular payment in exchange for Vincent's paintings. On March 26, 1885, Van Gogh's father died. By now, Vincent's work was growing bolder and more assured. In May, he completed the most memorable of his pictures from this period, The Potato Eaters. Considered to be his first masterpiece, it's a compassionate portrayal of peasants at their meager evening meal. Of this, he wrote to Theo, "I've tried to emphasize that those people, eating their potatoes in the lamplight, have dug the earth with those very hands they put in the dish, and so it speaks of manual labor and how they have honestly earned their food." The dark, gloomy colors of this painting and others from this period are rendered from Vincent's vivid memory and his burning desire to make a sociological statement. In November 1885, Van Gogh moved to Antwerp, Belgium, and entered the Art Academy for a short time. At all times, he carried his sketchbook and practiced his hatching strokes in black charcoal. As he wrote, "The thing is to learn to draw well, to be master of my pencil or my crayon or my brush. This gained, I shall make good things anywhere." While in Antwerp, he gained a more intimate understanding of the works of Rubens, Hals, and Rembrandt, and resolved to achieve his own excellence in portraits. But Vincent, ever an individualist, also concluded that the Academy destroyed the freshness of a visual impression. He was growing excited about the use of colors. On December 28, 1885, he wrote Theo, "I also believe that if one aims for serenity and retains one's zest for living, one's state of mind helps a great deal. And in that respect, I have gained by coming here, for I've new ideas and new means of expressing what I want. The better brushes are going to prove a great help, and I'm very excited by those two colors, carmine and cobalt." Up to this point, the influence of his artistic hero Millet is evident in Vincent's work. With Millet's realistic approach, the artist depicted nature or everyday life in as realistic a way as possible. In February of 1886, Vincent joined Theo in Paris. His painting would begin to undergo an extreme metamorphosis under the combined influence of Impressionism and Japanese woodcuts. The unfortunate aspect of this period is that for the next 2 years, there was virtually no written correspondence. While the blending of the artistic and psychological understanding of Van Gogh may be hampered, the Paris period became a pivotal time for Vincent. In Paris, the Impressionist form of art was the major art movement of the late 1800s. An Impressionist's goal was to capture the visual impression of a scene, particularly the changing effects of light, rather than its exact detail. Vincent also benefited from Theo's art world connections. Soon he was exchanging thoughts and criticisms with the leading artists of the day who experimented with Impressionism but found it to be too restricting. The year 1886 was a turning point in the history of art. The Impressionists held their last group exhibition that year, and it was also the launching year of the post-Impressionist movement. Among the often studied works of Van Gogh are his substantial number of self-portraits. In Paris alone, he produced 20 self-portraits at various times. Though it is evident he was not always honest in his self-portrayals, they do lend insight into his artistic experimentations and development. In early 1886, for example, his self-portraits are melancholy and dark, a reflection of his poor health. He virtually starved in order to save money to buy art supplies. Of his haggard look, he wrote Theo, "I have lived without money for a dinner because the work costs me too much, and I have relied too much on my being strong enough to stand it. I've made it worse by smoking a great deal, which I did the more because then one does not feel an empty stomach so much." Then, by the spring of 1887, his dark palette made way for the use of brighter colors. He wrote, "The more ugly, ill, poor I get, the more I want to take my revenge by producing a brilliant color, well arranged, resplendent." By 1887, the strength of his artistic development is evident. In Kitchen Gardens in Montmartre, he depicts the sloping countryside and its buildings. One senses the movement down the path. He incorporates a highly original interpretation of Seurat's pointillism, the use of separate dots of unmixed color, as he applied color in dense dots and dashes in the background. In another 1887 painting, the portrait of Pere Tanguy, Vincent's deep jabbing brushstroke is noted, as well as importance of Japanese prints that he arranges in the background. He wrote, "Instead of trying to reproduce exactly what I have before my eyes, I use color more arbitrarily so as to express myself more forcibly." Though his paintings were coming to life with color and passion, Vincent was still unsettled and unhappy. In February 1888, he decided to move south to Arles, a small city near Marseille, France. He rented a small house known as the Yellow House because of its exterior color and decorated it with severe simplicity. The sunny Mediterranean setting inspired Van Gogh. Ideas, he wrote to Theo, are coming to me in swarms. It was a frantic time of production for Vincent. He worked to the point of exhaustion. Even his bedroom was a source of inspiration for a painting named Vincent's Room. My dear Theo, I'm sending you a little sketch at long last to give you at least some idea of the direction my work is taking. Because I feel quite well again today. My eyes are still tired, but I had a new idea all the same. This time it's simply my bedroom. Only here everything depends on color. And by simplifying it, I am lending it more style, creating an overall impression of rest or sleep. Thus began the period from February 1888 to May 1889 that is considered by many to be his most creative period. In a way, the works from this time are a synthesis of his two previous developmental periods. From his stay in Noonan, he had emerged as a painter with a passion for painting outdoors. Then in Paris, he had incorporated the world of color and style as he experimented with Impressionist theories. Now, in Arles, he sometimes painted up to 16 hours a day. Over a year, he produced hundreds of landscapes, still lifes, and portraits. In addition to his constant painting, Van Gogh wanted to establish an artist colony in Arles. After much coaxing, his old friend Paul Gauguin finally joined him in October 1888. For the next 9 weeks, Gauguin and Van Gogh worked a great deal together. Gauguin encouraged Vincent to paint more from memory, which he did. Among the paintings from this endeavor were The Red Vineyard and Memory of the Garden at Eton. During this visit, Gauguin shared his admiration of Van Gogh's sunflower paintings done in Paris, but added that he considered the newer versions being done in Arles to be superior and even finer than those of Claude Monet. Inexplicably, Vincent did not accept the compliment and indeed felt that his current sunflower painting was a grossly inferior work. In his words, Van Gogh said, "It's certainly me, but me gone mad." The argument led Vincent to throw a glass of absinthe at Gauguin. Though the incident was smoothed over for the time being, the two men were soon quarreling again. At Christmas, passions peaked when Vincent threatened Gauguin with a razor. Gauguin apparently was able to calm his friend, but chose to spend the night in a hotel. That night, Vincent cut off part of his right ear. Suffering from loss of blood and hallucinations, he was taken to a hospital. The incident marked the beginning of a long period of mental instability for Van Gogh. In early January, he commemorated the event in his self-portrait with bandaged ear. His depression and isolation can be seen. He wrote Theo, "Physically I'm well. The wound is healing very well, and the great loss of blood is righting itself. The thing I dread most is insomnia." He was released after 2 weeks, but overwork brought on a relapse. When he finally returned to his yellow house, he found that he was no longer welcome by the local residents. Within a year of his arrival in Arlee, all his hopes and optimism had been shattered. Gone was Gogh, and with him, Van Gogh's plans for an artist's colony. In March 1889, he reassured Theo, "As far as I can judge, I'm not really mad. You will see that the canvases I've done in the meantime are untroubled and no worse than the others." Perhaps Vincent was masking the truth of his feelings, but by the beginning of April, he resumed his work on Orchards in Blossom. However, he felt disoriented. He soberly assessed his condition to Theo. "What comforts me is that I'm beginning to look upon madness as a disease like any other and to accept it as such." But he dreaded the return of his mental illness so much that he left Arlee and committed himself to an asylum in St. Remy. He was probably suffering from epilepsy or schizophrenia, but cold baths were the only treatment he received. Despite bouts of convulsions and hallucinations he produced at a frenzied pace during his year in the asylum. From Theo, he requested large tubes of paint: emerald, cobalt, ultramarine, orange, and white. At first, he painted irises, lilac bushes, and tree trunks overgrown with ivy that he admired from his window. By the middle of June, Vincent ventured beyond the garden of the asylum. Theo wrote reassuring letters of praise for Vincent's works. Vincent produced one masterpiece after another: The Reaper and The Starry Night. Vincent's doctor reported to Theo that Vincent's suicidal tendencies had gone, but that he was still suffering from nightmares. In late 1889, Van Gogh suffered another attack and tried to commit suicide by swallowing paint. He wrote Theo, "Oddly enough, I had been working quite calmly on canvases you will shortly be seeing when suddenly, without reason, I once again became confused. I got out of my bed at night to look at the landscape. Never has nature had such an affecting, such a moving impression on me." In February 1890, Theo wrote to Vincent to tell him that one of his paintings, The Red Vineyard, had been sold in an auction. It is believed that this is the only work he sold during his lifetime. By now, his seizures were following one another more quickly. Shortly after, Van Gogh decided to leave the south and move to Auvers, a village northwest of Paris. He was placed in the care of a Dr. Paul Gogh, who was a patron of the arts and had experience in treating mental disorders. While under Dr. Gogh's care, Vincent continued to paint with rapidity. Dr. Gogh even became a model for Vincent, who still was an ambitious painter of the modern portrait. Vincent wrote his sister Wilhelmina, "I have done the portrait of M. Gogh with a melancholy expression, which might well seem like a grimace to those who see it. And yet I had to paint it like that to convey how much expression and passion there is in our present-day heads in comparison with the old calm portraits, and how much longing and crying out. Sad but gentle, yet clear and intelligent. This is how many portraits ought to be done." At first, Van Gogh seemed in good spirits. He was painting steadily and took a room at the local cafe. But in July, a conversation about money with Theo, who was married and had a child, worried Vincent. Surely he was a financial drain on his brother. Vincent remained at Auvers, where at the scene of his last painting, Wheatfield with Crows, he walked into the wheat fields and shot himself in the chest. Severely wounded, he then walked home and went to bed, where he lay awake all night smoking his pipe. The following day, on July 28, 1890, Vincent died in his devoted brother's arms. He was 37. In the presence of a number of his painter friends, Van Gogh was buried among the wheat fields. His coffin was covered with yellow flowers, his favorite color. 14 months later, Vincent's brother Theo succumbed to his own mental disorder and died as well. Other than a small gathering of artist friends, Vincent was little known to the art world at the time of his death, but his fame grew rapidly thereafter. Between 1901 and 1906, several comprehensive exhibitions were held in Paris, making the work of Van Gogh and other post-impressionists widely accessible for the first time. For the painters who saw the achievements of this great artist, the effect was one of liberation, and they began to experiment with radical new styles. Turn-of-the-century artists embraced his avant-garde use of non-naturalistic colors. They admired Van Gogh, who had said of his own work, "Instead of trying to render what I see before me, I use color in a completely arbitrary way to express myself powerfully." Van Gogh is generally considered the greatest Dutch painter after Rembrandt. Through his numerous sketches and paintings, and through his letters, his life and art are exposed to an audience that still idolizes him over a century after his death. Van Gogh was never fully recognized in his lifetime, but today the world knows his serious and somewhat disheveled appearance is quickly recognized in his numerous self-portraits. In his self-portraits, one observes his striking use of color and coarse brushwork and can imagine the alternating moods of calm and despair that haunted Vincent. Through his body of works, he also revealed his surroundings and conveyed a spontaneous and uncalculated interpretation of the landscapes and people that he encountered. Color came to mean everything to Van Gogh, and no color meant more to him than yellow, as evident in his famous depiction of sunflowers. Though he dabbled with the small dashes of the impressionistic technique, he found comfort in a broad, vigorous, and swirling brushstroke, as exemplified by one of his most well-known paintings, Starry Night, created a year before his death. The hues of the night move about the canvas in Van Gogh's instantly recognizable style. As one art critic said, "The starry night vibrates with rockets of burning yellow, while planets gyrate like cartwheels. The hills quake and heave, yet the cosmic gold fireworks that swirl against the blue sky are somehow restful." Over 100 years have passed since Vincent van Gogh ceased to paint, and still we continue to study the masterpieces for all their brilliance and intensity, for all their insights into the troubled soul of an engrossing and significant artistic figure. His creations are timeless and among the most recognizable works of all time. They have also sold at record-breaking prices. In 1987, his painting of irises sold at auction for $53.9 million. In 1990, the portrait of Dr. Gogh sold for $82.5 million, the highest amount ever paid for a painting to that date. With an unprecedented flourish, he produced all his hundreds of pieces of art during a brief 10-year period. He signed his paintings simply Vincent, but was a complex man who has been romanticized as an artistic martyr to the development of modern art. In May 1890, shortly before his death, Vincent wrote Theo, "Oh, if I could have worked without this accursed disease. What things I might have done, isolated from others, following what the country said to me. But there, this journey is over and done with."